Welcome to Photoshop Tricks. This is an introduction to Photoshop CS3 version 10 by Adobe. One of the main things you're going to want to deal with in Photoshop is your preferences. If you start with General or Command K, it's probably different on a PC, so check your menu item under Photoshop Preferences General, and there will be a shortcut listed next to the word General as you see here. When the display box comes up, you'll see on the left hand panel you have a lot of selections. These selections can be clicked on to choose where you want to adjust the settings. Starting with General, everything is pretty much okay as it is. You need to play around with them. If you have a scroll wheel, for example, you can zoom with the scroll wheel. If you are not using a scroll wheel, you'd want to leave that off. You can click Next to go to the next item in the left-hand column. So just go ahead and check out what these are, and you'll decide whether you want them or not. Auto Collapse Icon Palettes is one that I suggest you use, because if you have it off, when you click a palette, it stays open when you click somewhere in your document. Whereas if you have auto collapse, when you click, it will disappear automatically, which is very helpful to maximize your screen real estate. So if you're looking at layers, for example, and you have a lot of layers and you have a window open, what's going to happen is this layers palette is going to be laid over your document, and it's going to make it difficult for you to see what's going on. So if you keep everything docked here, as you can see, the docks can move. You can take your history and drag it out, and there it is exposed. It will be on top of your document, whereas here it is shown behind the preferences window. You can drag it back in there to dock it into place. So I would recommend having auto collapse icon palettes selected. The next item you want to deal with is saving files. Do you want to save an image preview? This is something you'll have to decide on your own. If you select full size for the image previews, this will take up more memory on your computer. Okay. Another thing, you might want to have the file extension append selection on. It's up to you, depending on the files you work with. If you want a .jpeg or .eps or .gif to show up, this comes in handy. Performance is where you select your scratch disks. That's where, while you're working, Photoshop keeps information in the background and it writes to the background on that specific disk. Now, here you have a layout of how much RAM you have available. The ideal range is showing here is between 1689 and 2211. And I happen to have 4 gigs of RAM, but I have 3 gigs currently available. Okay, so that's up to you to decide. You may want to keep it down depending on how much RAM you have. Okay, so you use as much RAM as you can possibly allocate to it. Okay, since I have 372, or I'm going to go and give it 2500. History states. You can go back and forth in your history all the way up to 1000 in CS3. It's up to you. Do you want to undo 100 levels or 1000 levels? That's an awful lot of stuff to remember. I like to keep mine at 50. You can go with 100 if you like. Cache levels is dependent upon your hard drive, and I would leave that at 6, but what that does is it has various things that it keeps in memory while you are working. So if you go back in history to an item that's very deep in your history state, it may take a little while to get to that area. So the next item we're going to deal with is your cursors. A normal brush tip as shown here is good. Standard is like the brush, the eyedropper, depending on the tool that you have selected at the time. Normal brush tip is good. Full size brush tip is a little bigger, which is good if you have fades on that brush. Crosshair, maybe not recommended in the middle. Unless you desire it, you can have it. But I would stick with a normal brush. Cursor sizes, standard isn't literally look that great, but precise does. We go to next, transparency guides. This is the guide when you have a layer on your background that is empty and has nothing on it. You can go large, you can go small, you can go none. If you like to see that in the background to know that that's where you're looking totally way to the background that you've deleted after making it a layer, that's good for you. A gamut warning is when you get into a color and the color is not going to print right. You're really not worried about gamut warnings if you're doing web design, but if you are doing printing, you do want your gamut warning on, and you can click that color swatch and pick any color that you like. You can have blue, you can have yellow or whatever. I like the red because it stands out. The next item is units and rulers. Are you working in pixels or inches? Centimeters, millimeters, points, picas, or percentages? I keep mine on pixels because I'm doing web work. Column size, you can also pick the same here except for the pixels. Gutters would be gutters how much between the columns when you create columns. Resolution for printing 300. Screen resolution 9672 is okay because that's what most screens do, but some of the newer monitors, the flat screens, will come out at 96 and it gives you a better looking image. Next item is your guides, grids, and slices. These are your guides. You can have custom colors or you can change the color, which is shown over here in the swatch. It's up to you to decide what you lose. If you're working on a red background, you're obviously not going to want red guidelines. So you can change those for each document as you come to it. You have smart guides, which applies for smart filter items. You have grids. You can show grids. The grids, which are very fine grids, usually you can do those in a 1/4 inch pattern, or as shown here, you can have a grid to be shown every points, picos, pixels across. You can subdivision them. This is your lines. If you want to make lines with the line tool, the preference is going to be dash lines or dash lines or dot lines. Okay, so your slices, you can use a black or color to show the slice indicator on that. If you have additional plugins, you'll want to click here and then it'll ask you where to locate the additional plugins. These would be items that you have purchased somewhere. Legacy Photoshop Serial is something we're not going to cover in here, but you can search that on the Adobe website under Legacy. Next we have the final item, which is type. You can use smart quotes, which means when you put quotes, it knows where to go. Asian text options, okay. If you don't know what all of these options for the preferences indicate, you can always go up into the help menu and go to Photoshop help and click in the item you want to review, such as use smart quotes. Font preview size. Huge. I use huge because I have a lot of real estate on my monitor. Now you could change that to small, medium, extra large. It's up to you. Depends what you want to see the preview. When you select type with the type tool and you go to the type item to change it, which would be down here, the item would change to type tool. You can see how big your preview is. We can go after that in a while and I'll show you the huge preview in just a moment. And that's it. We're done with preferences. Okay, let's show you that type tool. In order to use the type tool, you can go there and you still see here. There's all the type fonts you have available. If they look large, it's much more convenient for you to see that font in a large example. That way you don't have to look at it when it's very small.